The plan to store tons of San Onofre's nuclear waste in underground canisters draws fire from neighbors. What drives local businesses crazy? From workers' comp to energy and housing costs, business owners have a lot to beef about doing business in San Diego. And Chief Shelley Zimmerman is trying to remove the cloud over the San Diego Police Department following misconduct by officers. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of some of this week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Jeff McDonald, watchdog reporter with UT San Diego. Good to have you back, Jeff.
Hi, Mark.
And Tony Perry, San Diego bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times. Hi, Tony.
Hi there.
And reporter Lisa Halverstad, a voice of San Diego. Good to have you here today,
Thanks
Lisa.
for having me, Mark.
Well, the very idea of nuclear energy scares a lot of people. Godzilla became the monstrous metaphor of that fear in Japan. And San Diego and Southern California, some fear we could soon come up with our own metaphor, as a plan to dispose tons of nuclear waste from San Onofre is causing some alarm. Well, Jeff, your story this week talked about a plan to bury these things. First of all, give us kind of the overview. What is that plan and who came up with it?
Well, the federal government is charged with the long-term storage of this spent fuel, but in the meantime, until there's a national repository for this, it falls on the utilities that are generating this waste to store it themselves.
At each site around where they have to do it. Yeah.
While San Onofre is in the decommissioning process, a lot of the attention has been focused on who's going to pay for putting the power plant out of business, and not so much, at least in the public arena, have been people focusing on what's going to happen with the fuel. So that's changing now that the plant is scheduled for closing. And they've been storing it on site for decades in pools. The intermediate plan is to bury it underground somewhere on site in a way that residents feel is threatening to them over the next several decades.
All right, and we're going to get to the details of that in a moment, but we do have a clip of San Clemente activist Donna Gilmore. She's talking about why she thinks this plan is a bad idea. Let's hear that. All right, we haven't got that one queued up. We'll get to her in a second, Donna Gilmore. Her concern mainly is, though, with this concrete casing. So explain to us, you said it's in these kind of cooling pools right now. They want to go to this dry storage thing. How will that work exactly?
Well, the fuel assemblies, which are the bundles of spent rods, they're right now stored at the bottom of these pools that are cooled and kept cool to prevent overheating. Those pools have reached capacity several years ago, and they've been actually doing some storage above ground in these canisters. That are thinly steel-lined canisters where they're put in it. But those are stored right now above ground. They have about 50 of those.
Okay, so they're they're stainless steel, are they, or steel canisters?
Well, they're concrete, but they're steel-lined.
Okay, steel-lined and
right.
In concrete. Okay,
they're stored above ground, which allows people to look at them, monitor them. They can walk by them, see them, check them.
Any problem at all, they can measure
right.
that above ground.
The intermediate plan that the utility is now proposing is to bury them underground, not just the ones they have already on site, but all the rest for when they empty the pools that contain the spent fuel that's at capacity now. So because you're not able to see it, check for cracks, do things like that, a lot of residents are concerned that that'll generate a huge threat to their communities.
Okay, and some of these activists who are upset about this, Donna Gilmore we mentioned, they want some different kinds of canisters here, but we also have a clip from David Victor. He's head of the public engagement on this issue for Edison, the utility. Let's see what David Victor has to say about that.
Do we know how to put nuclear waste into casks securely and then develop the monitoring systems and apply those monitoring systems? I've become confident we know how to do that. Do we know how to deal with all contingencies that are going to come up along the way? I think everybody knows that things are going to happen that we don't, for which the answers are not yet known.
All right, and of course earthquake faults run honeycomb through Southern California in this area near that defunct power plant, and he's saying, yeah, I think we can do it right now, but a lot of contingencies could come up.
Yes, the utilities will tell you that it's earthquake and seismically safe. The federal government says that. Residents aren't so sure because they're not convinced that the studying has been completed to conclude that. They also worry that the monitoring of the casks is limited to basically just taking the temperature of the area above where the fuel will be stored and waiting if there's a crack or any corrosion, then the leak will create a rising temperature, which will alert them to the leak. Of course, by then it's too late.
And so it's late and it's indirect and it's not direct measuring. Tony, are people too upset about this? Do they have real concerns? Is there any way to know in a post-Fukushima world?
It does bring up the issue that has hung over all of this, and that is the regulators, both at the state Public Utilities Commission and then the feds. How aggressive are they in dealing with the utility, or are they really all folks sitting around the same table? I mean, the accusation always is they don't really regulate; they're sort of partners with, and they're all believers. What do we got here? Do we still have that sense of suspicion?
Well, of course, it depends who you ask. The activists don't think the federal or the state regulators are doing a thorough enough job. The utilities say they're regulated to death and everything's as safe as it can be, and they're going to do their job as responsibly as they are directed to by the government. The state regulation here is limited to how the decommissioning funds are spent, so they don't really have a direct role in how the used fuel is stored in perpetuity. That responsibility lies with the feds, the Department of Energy, and they're designing regulations. They're looking for a national repository like Yucca Mountain, where it's buried hundreds of feet
That's
below.
over in Nevada, of course.
Yes, no, that's off the table now. And the utility is responsible to store the fuel until a federal repository is agreed to. Now, that's going to take, obviously, an act of Congress, which won't be easy because not everybody wants a nuclear fuel dump in their backyard.
Right. Well, and starting with who had been the majority leader, Senator Reid, over there in Nevada, and that's literally in his backyard.
Right.
Will people still be able to walk on the beach and surf those wonderful waves, or will this process impact that?
No, the beach will be usable, and the fuel will be. They're not saying exactly where they're going to store it for security reasons, but
just pretty entertaining in some ways.
Yeah,
Secret.
it's a really rich issue. There's a lot of different. But no, it's not going to be buried that deep. It's only about 6 feet, I think, or less than that. The top of it. Now the canisters are real tall, so it'll be deep. I mean the concrete lined tanks, but they're going to be planted.
And we should say it is a vault. I mean, they're not just tossing dirt on this. It's not burying the dog in the backyard.
It's very methodical. They've done a lot of research on it, and you talk to the David Victors, and they're very satisfied that the research will bear out, and that any technological shortcomings that we're confronting right now will be corrected in coming years as they continue to research safe storage.
Is it vulnerable to cyber warfare? Could somebody hack into the computer system and mess up their protection?
That didn't come up in my research.
Another moving part.
I don't know about that. I think that they're going to, they're obviously that is all Navy property, so it's going to be secured property. Cyber threats, that hasn't come up. I'm not sure.
I found it interesting, your story. You interviewed an attorney for Friends of the Earth, environmental group, as the name suggests, and they say the critics, like Donna Gilmore, their concerns are unfounded. That was interesting to me.
It was surprising to me too. They want to see nuclear power go away. They don't trust it as a fuel source.
So you got to take these plants down.
And to them, a big win was getting it decommissioned. Right. And so they feel like the threat of storage is a much lower risk than the threat of running a nuclear plant on the beach and on the California coast.
Continuing to go with that. Oh, that was very interesting. Now, how much will the storage of this waste cost, and who's going to pay that?
It's $1 billion plus, and ratepayers will pay it. The good news is we've already paid most of that. We've all been paying a decommissioning fund every month as part of our utility bill for years. So there's a pot of money set aside to fund this. And that's the control that the the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, has in overseeing that spending.
Okay, and we should note that this coming Tuesday up in San Clemente, the folks, the public, will have a chance to weigh in, and there is a hearing and a meeting on that. Yeah, it's the latest meeting of the engagement panel. At 6 o'clock, and for details on that, go to our website, kpbs.org. Well, we'll be looking for a lot more stories on this, I'm sure, as this process continues over many years. Well, we hear it all the time. San Diego is a lousy place to own a business, so businesses are leaving in droves. Too many regulations, too expensive, so many fronts. So it's largely, is that a myth or is that true? And Lisa, you set about to kind of answer that question. Why did you guys embark on this at Voice of San Diego?
Well, to start, so we had heard these claims too, especially in the past year. There had been a number of proposals that came before the San Diego City Council, and you'd have business owners coming to the meetings or getting on the radio and saying, my God, it's already so tough for us. How could you add something that's going to make my life even more difficult? So we wanted to peel back the layers and actually see what are the particular regulations or taxes that are so burdensome, and also to take a look and see how many businesses are actually leaving San Diego. And so I was lucky enough to get access to this really neat database that tracked company moves across the country, actually, over about a 20-year period. And what I could see is during that period, San Diego County was actually a net gainer of businesses as a result of relocation.
They're not leaving, they're coming.
They're coming, but it's interesting because it's not actually that big of a deal. One economist that I talked to in the state actually compared it to a pimple on the state of California economy in terms of business relocations. And I would also add that, we hear a lot about companies moving to Texas. So over this 20-year period, I found that about 380 companies moved to Texas. But let's put that in perspective
again. From all of California or
from San Diego County.
Okay.
And it's worthwhile to point out that there are about 100,000 businesses in San Diego County. And this is over a 20-year period. So not that big of a deal. Not as big of a deal as
But you did boil it down to kind of the four horsemen of the Acropolis, the four major areas of concern as you did your research. Tell us about those.
So
that would be concerns for high costs.
Yeah, so in talking to businesses, there were some things that just came up again and again. Energy cost, workers' compensation premiums, cost of living here that affects a number of things for businesses as well, and then also taxes. And in looking at that, I found that maybe what we should be most interested in looking at is taxes for manufacturers.
Okay, you zeroed in on that. All right, well, let's take those one by one. Tell us what you learned about the workers' comp costs. I mean, it really was an interesting story as you start probing into that.
Yeah, so what I found is, obviously we've heard over the years companies complaining about this. There's been some reform efforts. But what I could definitely see is California is a leader in terms of the cost for workers' compensation premiums. Now there's some dispute over whether they're at the top. There was a state of Oregon report that found that California did have the top cost for workers' compensation. And I'm going to give you a number too real quick that kind of puts this in perspective. If you think about every time that a company is going to hire someone, they have to factor these workers' compensation costs into that budget. So in California, some of the numbers I looked at had said that it would cost $2.93 for every $100 that you're paying somebody in the state of California.
Almost 3%.
By comparison, there are other states where it's closer to $1 and even less than $1. So there really is something going on.
So on workers' comp, it's a third of the cost for some other states. One of them's a neighboring state. Didn't you find Nevada?
Yes, Nevada.
And compared with what California is, that's quite a big deal. If a neighbor, you can go over and lower that significant overhead.
Exactly.
You open a business in San Diego, you get these business costs. But what else do you get? You get a nice retail market if you're into retail. You get an educated workforce. You get transportation. We're fairly close to LAX. You need to ship your goods out. I mean, it's a balancing, and your reporting would seem to suggest that on balance, it's still good to open and maintain a business here.
That was Tony Perry of the Chamber of Commerce. Oh, you're right. We love it here. The sunshine benefit is no question.
Isn't the argument whether the thing that keeps business down, these taxes, or lack of decent management, lack of market skills, lack of vision by the people who want to run businesses?
Here's what I would tell you, Tony. What I found in this, and maybe we'll talk about one particular sector, manufacturing. This is more of an issue for when a company wants to go from being a small company that's developing something here. So that's where the talent is so important. You need to have people who are smart and engaged and kind of know how to figure things out. We're a great market for that, is what I found. What's harder is when you want to multiply, when you're ready to say, let's become a household name company, let's produce on a large scale, then California and San Diego become more difficult because your costs per unit are higher.
That's when you outsource to Baja, right?
Potentially outsource to Baja
or other
Texas, states,
yeah.
which
exactly.
Is something that I certainly have talked to a bunch of companies who have at least looked at the possibility of moving
I will admit
for the
that
scale up.
there are certain taxes. There's a medical device tax, for example, part of Obamacare, that Scott Peters is trying to eliminate. There are targeted taxes that seem to hurt. But again, your reporting would seem to suggest that smallish companies, startups, can handle these costs because there's still pluses, and we have the Chargers and Comic-Con also, but that it can be handled if you're smart. And you got Dad's money as a startup. Okay.
But I would note that despite the fact that we're a major city, we have just 2 Fortune 500 companies, and that was pretty remarkable to me.
Ranch Office City.
And you know, some would say that that's not necessarily a bad thing. It shows that we've got a nimble, innovative economy here. But there are other folks who would say, that maybe tells us something about how difficult it may be to grow a large company here in San Diego.
Let's talk about, you alluded to this earlier on, about the high cost of living here for people to live, workers to live here, and the impact that has on, what did you find the impact on businesses?
Well, I think we all know that we do pay more to live here. There maybe is a little bit of a sunshine tax, but that doesn't just affect us, it affects the people who are paying us. And so they have to budget more to potentially hire us. If they want to make sure that we'll stay at our job, you might want to make sure that you're paying them more. But what companies were telling me is sometimes this can cause ripple effects. It may be harder to recruit people from another place because they may be making a certain salary in, say, Texas or Ohio, and they're able to own a nice home and they can send their kids to good schools, and then they come and look at San Diego and they're just not, it just doesn't pencil out as well.
Sticker shock hits them.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you determined there was an actual figure to that. What's the, you quoted someone saying the livable wage here, you really have to make this certain amount to have any kind of decent life, the one Tony's alluding to here.
Yeah. Well, this was a business owner, so I'll take that with a grain of salt. You know, he's very smart, but he's not an economist. But he was saying that from his perspective, he felt that he needed to pay his workers at least $65,000 or so for them to live a good life and feel comfortable in San Diego.
Isn't it true that during this recession, companies have learned to be nimble, and one thing they've learned to do is not hire full-time employees and pay them contractors. 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, no benefits. And then after 6 months, you either get re-upped or you go away and somebody else comes in. So companies have responded, I think, they've taken advantage of the recession. So they've learned to accommodate these costs. On the backs, frankly, of people who are looking for jobs. But
True, but I do think what's interesting about this, and this is more my theory, is I think that we might be starting to hear more about this coming up soon, because now that the economy is improving, there are more hiring situations, hopefully. And then at that point, companies are having to negotiate more because it's more of an employee's market rather than an employer's market. And so when that happens for businesses, this may end up kind of creating new questions for them about how much they should be paying.
So that dynamic and several others here are changing. Well, we'll look forward to more of your reporting on this. I know you're going to get into energy costs as well.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we're going to shift gears now. There were broad smiles and congratulations all around when Shelley Zimmerman was promoted to chief of the San Diego Police Department nearly a year ago. But everyone knew the city's first female police chief faced daunting challenges as she took the reins. And Tony, start with an overview. What was the department like when she inherited that last February, if I recall?
She was the first and probably to this point biggest move that Kevin Faulkner has made as mayor. He named her as chief within days of being elected, even before being sworn
out. No big national search?
No, and he eased the police chief, Bill Lansdowne, into retirement. He's never really been very candid on how he did that, but he did it. And Shelley Zimmerman, 55 years old, 30 years with the department, had been assistant chief. Now she's the chief, and she's got two problems. She's got a public relations problem of people who just don't trust this police department because of certain things that have occurred.
We'll get into that.
And then the intractable financial problem. Study out just this week of cities across the country, 13 cities in California. San Diego pays less for police, not their salaries necessarily, but that's another issue, just pays less per capita, spends less per capita than all the cities that were looked at in California, except Bakersfield. That's San Diego. A smaller department, fewer police per capita than virtually any large city.
Well, thank goodness we're better than Bakersfield.
That is a problem citywide. We've been skating on community-oriented policing for a number of years, but we've pulled back. We've, during the recession, closed the community storefronts, left positions open, fired, laid off, if you will, civilian positions. That intractable financial issue of the city government, I think, is probably the biggest problem. But she's also got the problem for which the city called for an audit by the Department of Justice, and that was outsourced to a nonprofit that does these things. And that should be out in a couple of weeks. We should learn more about this department than we've ever known.
Yeah, I want to get more into some of those questions on that cloud we talked about. I did want to ask you, though, in your profile, how would you characterize her style? What kind of chief is Shelley Zimmerman, and maybe how does that contrast with her predecessor?
Well, she's out and about. I mean, you name it, she's there. A bar mitzvah or a Christmas party.
Junior high assembly, she's
or
out
junior high assembly. She is out there. She believes that the alienation, if there is any with the city police department, begins with the chief. Now, Lansdowne was also out there. All the chiefs, we don't have a history of chiefs going into their office and never leaving, but she is certainly more aggressive. She's out and about every day, seemingly all day. Although, be there an officer-involved shooting, she's also there. So she's out and about, always wearing the uniform, no civilian clothes for her, runs the beach in the morning, and puts on the uniform and away she goes. Yeah.
I did want to segue into this whole matter of trust in this cloud. We do have a clip from Zimmerman. She's at a panel of Society of Professional Journalists here in San Diego, of course, and she talks about why trust is so important.
You know, we've had a few of our officers over the last several years that have made the terrible decision to discredit our badge, dishonor our noble profession. And that is not representative of the vast majority of our officers that serve every day with honor, distinction, dedication, personal courage, professionalism. And I am a huge proponent in complete support of body-worn cameras because of community trust. And it takes years to build up that community trust, and in just moments that trust could start to erode away.
All right, and of course, she's talking about the sexual assault cases.
And probably the worst of the year, Avalos case, right. 18 women, et cetera, et cetera.
And the racial profiling, which had fallen by the wayside, was a back burner issue, and now it's back front and center.
She and Lansdowne, before he was ushered into retirement, did a number of things. Body cameras, reinstituted keeping racial stats on traffic stops. Shelley also has sent out a memo, no asking pro forma, are you on parole or probation, no making people sit on the curb, all sorts of things like that. The transgender folks, and memo went out, don't make assumptions that they're into prostitution because they're dressing in a way that seems different to you. All sorts of stuff like that. And she looks pretty hard-nosed. She told me her officers, if they make a mistake when they're dealing with a difficult situation, that's one thing. They go out to do something they know is wrong. Their history, they're not going to work for me. Racial profiling, very controversial, very hard to prove one way or another. She says, I find anyone who racially profiles, who stops motorists because they're black or brown, he's not going to work, he or she is not going to work for me either. So she's quite willing to fire people.
All right, so the body cams, the new edicts that Tony's talking about here, do they work? Do they restore trust?
I think it remains to be seen. This department has had a number of high-profile missteps, and a lot of these folks still work there, and some have been promoted. So it's easy to say they're not going to work for me if they exercise this behavior or that behavior. But it's a lot more difficult to actually get rid of people.
You know, I think, we don't know yet, but I think that audit is going to come back and say that there was a problem with the department, lack of management at certain levels, that cops started to go off the rails and should have been counseled, should have been caught, should have been something or another, but they just didn't have enough management. Well, that's the recession, where you've sent everybody out on patrol and you have very few sergeants. So I think that audit is going to say you really should worry more about that. Then it gets back to money. Where's the money?
Well, but a couple points on both of those things, the body-worn cameras. What's interesting about those is the chief is out there saying these are going to have allow the public to judge us. But the thing is that she's saying that they aren't necessarily going to be released to the public. So I may have an incident and not be able to necessarily get a copy of that to be able to view it and then judge the actions of the police department.
We're going to have to see how that works in practice.
But the officer can look at it before he writes his report about what happened.
True.
That's a controversy everywhere these body cameras
No, but
are
other
involved.
agencies are releasing them and even posting them on YouTube.
Well, and I asked her, I said, what if we, God forbid, have a Ferguson-style issue, controversial police shooting, et cetera, et cetera? And she said, my inkling would be to release it quickly, particularly if it clears
We'll
the
have to
police.
see how that
Of
goes in
course.
practice
Yeah.
and things
Yeah.
can
But I'm
change.
not sure that body cameras
yeah.
are what keep cops on the straight and narrow. What keeps it on is the ethos and the management. Yeah, body camera's nice, but
The culture of the department,
It's the
the
culture of the
leadership.
department,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that I think we're still in better shape than a lot of departments. Los Angeles, for example.
Yeah.
What was the other
one
point
thing
you
I'd
wanted to
also
make? Yeah.
note is that the Department of Justice report that you're talking about, the Department of Justice is not conducting
That's
that.
true.
They've actually outsourced that to a police research group that has ties to former Chief Lansdowne. And so there have been some questions raised about how deep this report is going to be, how tough it's going to be on the police force. And in fact, it seems to be more of a review of their policies
Yes.
rather than their behaviors,
Yeah,
which is significant.
It's not going to be like the report the Department of Justice did about the Cleveland Police Department that found all sorts of force. But I think it's going to be very tough in terms of management, that they just weren't managing well because they didn't have enough people. There are a lot of cops and very few sergeants, for example. Again, money. But yeah, you can. But it was a requested audit. Now, this isn't like when the Department of Justice comes in, whether you like it or not. I mean, they ask for this thing, and then it got outsourced. Now, these folks that they outsourced it to, they did a pretty tough report on the Border Patrol and use of force and force change.
Well,
So
we're
they're
about
not
out
real
of time. So
pussycats.
we're going to have to look for your reporting on that report. It's a very good story. And that does wrap up another week of stories here at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Jeff McDonald of UT San Diego, Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times, and Lisa Halverstadt of Voice of San Diego. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.